Okay, so today I want to talk about force on force training tools, what's out there, what's available for civilians and civilian based training groups, and also talk over some considerations that you should have before you decide to invest your money into a training platform. Force on force training is critical to developing skills that you don't really get when you just shoot on the flat range. Being able to think on your feet under pressure, communicating and coordinating with a team, using cover appropriately, being able to shoot and move in a contested space, all of these things are very important skills that you just don't get on the flat range.
Okay, but what exactly should we be looking for in a force-on-force training platform? Well, number one, it needs to closely mimic the real steel counterpart. If your real rifle is an AR, your training platform should look and feel like an AR. Also, you should be able to use majority of your real equipment alongside it, potentially just swapping out real magazines for training ones and being good to go. You should be able to utilize your plate carriers, your helmets, your radio, your night vision, etc. It really just needs to be close enough. Don't get lost in the sauce and trying to make the gun as realistic as possible at the expense of everything else. Force on force is not a replacement for live fire range time. Secondly, it needs to be durable enough to survive field conditions and reliable enough that you can use the platform without having to fight your own equipment the entire time. It should be able to handle the rain, the cold, and the heat. If it requires real maintenance to run at all, it should be fairly minimal. The point here is that it should work without having to baby it. That said, it probably doesn't need to be able to be used as a hammer, so don't require that of it. Unless, of course, your use case specifically does require it to be used as a hammer, in which case, well, do your thing, I don't know. The platform needs to work consistently. It can't be constantly jamming up or having other hardware issues. If it doesn't just work, you're not going to want to deal with using it. And lastly, it needs to be accessible, as in, can you legally acquire it? And even if it's technically legal, is it easy to acquire? Giving your guys options and levels of ways to engage with the training platform can be nice, as long as it all works within the same ecosystem and makes sense for your use case. In line with that, it should be reasonably affordable. Now, what's reasonable and what's affordable will vary person to person, but the greater the value proposition, the more likely it is that you'll be able to convince the other guys you train with to invest alongside you. Remember, this whole thing is pointless if nobody takes the leap with you.
There are a number of different training platforms out there. You have things like Simulations and UTMs, you have things like Miles Gear, you have things like paintball and airsoft, and you also have things like VR applications. Before we compare them, I should say clearly that there's a couple of these that I've actually never personally used, so when talking about them, I'm just using my best judgment, that's all I got. The comparison isn't really intended to say that one is objectively better than the other, as I believe that all of these have pros and cons that apply differently to different users. Ultimately, with any of them, you get out of it what you and the other participants put into it. If you take it seriously and you take efforts to mitigate some of the cheesiness that can come from any training platform, I believe that all of these have legitimate value.
Alright, so let's go over some of our options. Starting off, we have Simmunitions/UTMs. Sim rounds are a very cool system, utilizing a conversion kit in your actual firearm. This lets you get reps with your real rifle setup. They're fairly reliable and are a solid way to conduct force-on-force training. However, outside of 30 to 40 yards, accuracy begins to seriously suffer, making them good for close range only. There is something to be said for the pain factor of Simmunitions. You're more likely to take the training seriously if getting shot hurts as bad as Sims often do. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter how good the system is if it's too difficult to acquire. Generally, you'll need Leo credentials, making this a no-go for civilian groups. If you want to do this, you'll need to take a class. Okay, now next up we have Miles Gear. Miles stands for Multiple Integrated Laser Engagement System, and it's fundamentally just laser tag with blank fire guns. A blank fire adapter is put on your real rifle, so much like with Simmunitions, you get time on your actual build. Your maximum engagement distance is going to be significantly further than other systems, as it's more or less line of sight. This does mean, however, that the smallest amount of foliage can block your rounds, whereas other platforms may be able to punch through. But, just like with Simmunitions or UTMs, civilian availability is limited and prohibitively expensive. It does show up on the surplus market on occasion, though. Next up we have blank fire. While mouse gear is difficult to acquire, blank rounds and blank fire adapters aren't. This means you can shoot blanks at each other. While not particularly cheap, it's certainly an option. The biggest issue is determining hits in a majority of cases, leading to a number of awkward moments where you and the enemy can no longer maneuver on each other and are just firing at guys you each can see, but nobody is really getting out. Now, the poor person alternative to this is just pointing empty rifles at each other and quite literally yelling bang bang for much of the same effect. I mean, it feels a bit silly at first, but fundamentally it's nearly the same thing. It's an option, but it's limited. Next up we have things like VR. Now, gaming and virtual reality specifically offer interesting opportunities for training, but I'm not going to go too in depth here as this could be a video all on its own, but here I'll just defer to what has already been said. If you take it seriously, there are ways to make this helpful. Overall, I don't feel like this is a good standalone option. However, accessibility counts for a lot and headsets are fairly common and easy to acquire, so personally, I think that counts for something. If you go this route, consider Onward or Tactical Assault VR. And finally, that brings us to the real topic of this video, which is airsoft. Hey, stay here, let me make my case. I know the image that airsoft has in much of the training community, and it's well deserved, but we're not really the target audience for the airsoft industry at large, so of course the marketing seems kind of cringe, but hear me out. I've already gone over some of the other solutions out there and why they may or most likely may not work for you. That leaves us with airsoft.
Airsoft not only offers fairly realistic equipment at a reasonable price, but it's also widely available. You can buy this stuff online easily, and there are hundreds of fields across the United States for you and your team to play/train at. Admittedly, the guns aren't as durable as real ones, of course, but as long as you don't abuse it too bad, you should be okay. Just look at any of the more hardcore milsim style events that happen all over the United States every single year, and you'll see that a lot of these guns can run for days in rough conditions and run just fine. If you need a rifle that functions identical to your real one, you can get something like a gas flowback and maintain a realistic manual of arms. However, if all you need is something that looks like your AR and shoots BBs reliably, you can get something like this, which is an AEG. If you want something fancy, it's out there. But if your training experience is fine with something cheaper, there are plenty of options available. And importantly, nearly regardless of manufacturer, these all work in the same ecosystem. So I'm talking the same ammo, the same fields available, the same general rule sets, all of that. When you and your group are just training amongst yourselves, you can adopt a special rule set to facilitate a more realistic training environment. For instance, rules just basically like, hey, if you wouldn't do that in real life, don't do that here. Maybe tell you guys that every time they get hit, they owe you like 30 push-ups. That way there's a punishment for poor decisions. One of the biggest benefits to investing in airsoft for this reason is simply the ability to attend other events. Even if you manage to get your hands on a full set of miles gear or a bunch of simulations ammo or whatever, it's not like you can just show up to a field with that and get some time in with your kit. With airsoft, you can. And let's be honest, there's hardly a better way to shake out your fighting kit than to spend an entire weekend running and jumping and crawling and climbing and fighting in it. Of course, when you play in normal public games, you're going to run into people who aren't taking it nearly as seriously as you probably are. So if that bothers you, that's great, that's fine. There are tons of milsim style events that you can attend instead. For instance, Milsim West, but we'll talk about them a bit more later. Airsoft is obviously imperfect. Typically, you can't expect more than about 150 to 200 feet of range from your stock rifle, which is more than UTMs, but you'll still frequently find yourself able to see the enemy before you can actually hit them.
Okay, so here we're at about 90 yards. And this is eyeballed, to be clear, this isn't exact, but eyeballing 90 yards. I do need to aim like 10 feet above the target at this point to make these hits fairly consistent, but that just goes to show that these guns aren't quite as limited in range as you probably believe they are.
Despite what I said earlier, airsoft guns of course do break, gas-powered guns struggle in the cold, and concealment rarely differs from cover. But despite these issues, airsoft is the best tool for the job for the civilian user. As I said before, you can take steps to mitigate the cheesiness of it. Milsim West events are a great example of some ways you can do this. For instance, as part of the rule set, if you're taking cover directly behind a tarp or a tent wall or something like that, and BBs start impacting that tarp or tent wall, well, technically the BBs didn't hit you, sure, but in real life, you would quite obviously be dead, so at Milsim West, you're out. The same rule also applies to bushes or other light foliage.
Milsim West events are primarily played with airsoft guns, however, they uniquely also allow blank fire rifles. If you haven't seen it already, Blue Jean Operator has an in-depth video discussing blank fire integration into Milsim West. The gist of it is that if someone is shooting a blank fire rifle at you, as a player you are compelled to seek cover. If you're out in the open with no cover immediately available, you're dead.
This gives squads the ability to engage targets far beyond the range of their normal airsoft guns and lets you pin down the opposing force to enable you to maneuver on them. As well as, of course, getting kills if the enemy is out in the open or otherwise just can't get to cover in time. You may recall from earlier how in reference to using blank fire as a standalone training solution, I mentioned that you can literally just yell bang bang as an alternative way to achieve effectively the same result. Hear me out. Is there any reason why you couldn't combine airsoft with the verbal bang bang system? Now, I gotta be honest here, I've never actually been able to convince my training group to do this with me, so if you see any glaring issues that I've somehow missed, let me know, I guess. But in my mind, here's an example of how this would work.
Okay, so here we have a scenario where you have the red team over here on the left and the blue team over on the right. Let's assume for now that they are outside of airsoft gun range. Blue team is currently behind cover, whereas red team is out in the open approaching them. Blue team sees them first and opens fire by yelling bang bang at them. Now, the lead man of the red team element is currently exposed with no cover imminently available. In this situation, he is dead. However, the rear man is standing next to several vehicles which are immediately available cover, so he is compelled to seek and hold that cover for as long as he is being fired upon. The red team member can return fire on blue as long as he continues to hold cover. Now, blue team can move up on red, but only as long as they are using a bounding maneuver, as demonstrated here. If the red team is not firing back on blue, they're free to move however they want to. Here, blue team has managed to move up closer. If, for some reason, blue team stops firing upon red, red is now free to move as he wants. Or, if red reasonably believes he's broken line of sight with blue, he is no longer suppressed. In this scenario, red chooses to close the gap, and is now in range and able to engage blue team with his airsoft rifle instead, where he secures a hit on the bottom blue team member. This is just a general outline of how this hybrid system can be used together to give teams the ability to engage from further distances, and encourages the use of tactical techniques and battle drills. Obviously, you should adjust these as needed to foster whatever training environment fits you and your team best. It won't be perfect. There will be weird moments where someone's being shot but they don't realize it's them being yelled at, so they don't react appropriately. You'll just have to work through these issues and remember that it's just training. Also, the initial part of this exercise, before either team was within airsoft gun range, is exactly how using blank fire as a standalone training method works.
Essentially, you're just empowering all of your participants with the blank fire capabilities from Milsim West while they still retain their airsoft guns for engagements up close. This allows you to kill or at least pin down enemy players who make the mistake of standing out in the open, even if they're far outside the range of your airsoft guns. This mitigates not only the largest problem with airsoft, but also the largest problem with the blank fire system as well. Just food for thought. Honestly, most of the training value that I got from the Milsim West that I attended were the moments outside of when I was slinging BBs back and forth with the enemy.
It was the hours spent patrolling with my squad. It was when we were huddled over a map in the pouring rain, planning out an intelligence gathering op. It was when we set up an ambush for the retreating Rust 4 under night vision. It was a rotating firewatch each night. It was finding out that my radio setup sucked. It was having to make sure that my MGs were placed properly. It was also learning how to work cohesively in a platoon-sized element.
And all of this is currently only possible through the means of airsoft. If Miles gear and simunitions became commercially available and widely used such that there were events like Milsim West of that scale that you could attend, I would be happy to consider them competitors to airsoft in this space, but they just aren't. It isn't there. Yes, I'm aware that there are classes you can attend where you can use simunitions against each other. I'm aware that there are places you can go that actually let you use Miles gear. But for the cost of entry, I just don't think it's worth it. With airsoft, your group can use it every single month, and it's virtually free to use once you've acquired the basics. BBs are cheap. So you tell me what's better. Equipment that's a little bit more realistic, but is so expensive that the average person can't afford to rent it more than, once a year? And then you're stuck to their rules, their facility, and their time. Whoever you're renting it from. Or you can go with something like airsoft, where it costs even less, you get to own all of your own equipment, and you can use it anytime, anywhere, including even in your backyard for dry fire reps, at the cost of some realism in your platform, but honestly not even that if you go the gas blowback route. Now we can debate how important it is for a weapon to be exactly the same as your real one in a force-on-force training environment, but number one, even with Sims and Miles gear, your gun doesn't function exactly the same as it does normally. And two, much of the argumentation here can also be used to say that dry fire leads to bad training habits and that you shouldn't do it. But we don't do that anymore, do we? And yes, I have seen the Unit 4 training rifles. They're kind of expensive, but they are available for civilians, so there is something there. My issue with them is that they function basically the exact same as a gas blowback airsoft rifle, except that you can't actually use them within the airsoft infrastructure that already exists, which is one of the biggest selling points. So I don't really see the point.
So where should you start? What gun should you buy? Honestly, I have no idea. Despite all I've said, I'm not really an airsofter. I've played twice in the last year and I'm not really up to date on what's good and what's not. But at a minimum, expect to pay about $150 for an AEG, more if you want something nicer. Grab a few mid-cap magazines, a couple batteries, and some BBs. .28s or higher, trust me, and you're good to get started.
If nothing else, it's usually a pretty good time and gives you an excuse to put on and shake out your fighting kit for the day. And if you get the chance to attend an event like Milsim West, do it. You'll probably learn more there in one weekend than you do in many normal FTXs with your training group.
Also, one last note before we get out of here. In case I explained all of this poorly, let me lay it out clearly. Airsoft has many flaws as a training system. However, due to the current state of the tools available to us, I believe it is our best option. If Sims or Miles gear became commercially available and affordable, Airsoft would quickly take a back seat. I mostly made this video out of spite from one too many people telling me that Airsoft is lame and that we should use Sims instead. Like, okay man, go get some and we'll talk. Anyway.
If you disagree with anything I've said in this video, let me know. I'd love to hear it. Anyway, that's what I've got, so thanks for watching.